Raise your vibration by tuning in to Awakening Code Radio every Tuesday night here on KX 93.5.
Just so exciting. So the Integratron, as far as most people understand it, was sort of like a energy vortex. We use that word vortex, geomagnetic. You know, it's almost like once you started it running, it was going to sort of accelerate using the vortex energy of the Earth to keep accelerating. Really just levitating this big armature, this big ring of spokes, almost on its own as the way to keep this generator running and manufacturing lots and lots of electricity. And that never got built or turned on to the way Van Tassel had imagined it. I mean, we've talked about it. We still think that it does something. Is there any documents or anything of his research or models that exist to say a better idea of how it was supposed to work with electricity?
Well, there are some, but I think the important thing to remember is that George considered the Integratron a proprietary invention. And so he wrote some about it, but even in all of his books and all of his newsletters, there's nothing really revealed there that we couldn't just deduct by looking at it.
Right.
Say
it there
way.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are lucky enough actually to have some friends who are physicists, and we certainly have plenty of people like that visit the Integratron. And when we ask them and have asked them, what do you think? Do you think we can turn this on? Their standard answer, and it's always very thoughtful, but their standard answer is, actually, it's kind of on. So I feel it's partly on and maybe parts of it are not on. Certainly it's not making 50 megavolts of electricity. And I have a feeling, at least our lawyer has a feeling, that before we make 50 megavolts of electricity with it, we need to do a good bit of research. There are a few dozen people who feel they have the absolute inside track to finishing it. And we pay attention to all of it, actually.
And, you know, I wonder sometimes because I always go back and forth. I think of Van Tassel's upbringing, his study, his becoming an aeronautical engineer, his awareness of the greatest advances in electricity at the time. We were talking about like the Manhattan Project, where they were making electricity make things disappear and travel through time. In at least experimenting, we know that the government was doing something with the Manhattan Project with huge amounts of electricity on a boat.
The Philadelphia
experiment, right. So, I mean, we know that the government was taking it kind of seriously. And then, so we wonder, at times I wonder if Van Tassel was maybe bringing some of his awareness that wasn't necessarily part of if it was extraterrestrials, their design, almost as if, sure, bring your version of electricity and power. I mean, if we're traveling to you could generate whatever you want, and it's going to be a pittance of what we're talking about. To me, it almost makes sense that it was like a machine that could be turned on even if we did not have a power grid, or if humanity disappeared for 1,000 years and somebody stumbled on it. It's like, no, it could still do something.
I agree with that. And with your great explanation of the 432 frequency, it's actually helped me understand it, your explanation. That's a very common theme. This is the 432.
It seems to me, the 432 thing to me, people have all kinds of frequencies that they've become very passionate about. There's people that talk about the solfeggio scale, and the 528 hertz is the vibration of love and the heart opening and everything else. And if you believe like what Jonathan Goldman believes, if you say that particular frequency is your heart-opening frequency, then it is. All frequencies can be activating frequencies, sacred frequencies. There's not such thing as a bad frequency. What starts bugging me a little bit when I studied Leonard Horowitz's work, who came up with the 528 hertz as being significant, plus about another 7 or 8 of them, 720 was one of them, or 721. He tried to extrapolate why, like, this is connected to sacred geometry. I was interested because he's mentioning sacred geometry and sound frequency in the same paragraph or sentence, but it was so convoluted, I couldn't get it. I mean, maybe just because I'm not a physicist or whatever, I couldn't get it. But then I did notice stuff that he was using to back up his reasoning. He said, 528 is in human consciousness. It's the reason that we have 5,280 feet in a mile. And it's like, well, it doesn't take much of a Google search to realize that the mile of 5,280 feet was a function of British furlongs multiplied times 8, I think. And then just happened to equal 5,280 feet, completely unrelated to anything to frequency. So I'm like, it has to be something a little more where it just sort of self-checks itself. Why should we think 432 matters? And when I laid out this grid, see, I didn't know 432 was not where I started. I started with geometric shapes, played those as tones, and when I laid those on a tone grid, using 9 as a factor to move up and down these scales, lo and behold, 432 just became one of the notes in that. In fact, where you think about geometric shapes, 180, 360, 540, 720, 1080, it doesn't matter. They all total 9, just like 432 does. When you go to 432 tuning and lock it in on this factor 9 grid, every single tone totals 9. Like, wow, that's cosmically strange, and the number 9 and 3s and stuff have played a huge part in our, sort of mythological mathematics, for whether it's Freemasons or whatever, that 3s and 3, squared is 9, and this 9 grid is revealing the geometric tones, revealing the way we measure space and time, and even the speed of light. I don't know how many of you know this, but the only whole number, when you square it, 432 squared is the speed of light within 0.001% accuracy. So it's almost like another hint that says, yes, 432 matters somehow, and we're just waiting for you to kind of put the jigsaw pieces of the puzzle together and sort of just take the very first baby steps of thinking of tone, geometry, numbers, spatial measurements, things like that. So that's where it's guided me. It's certainly not the end all of anything at all, but it sure has been an exciting trip so far. And going out to the Integratron and playing these tones definitely seems to do something kind of magical. But I've been, of course, the gongs did something magical too. So, that just kind of alludes to the nature of the building itself, that it's doing something truly profound with frequency.
It is. And it's good to have a guide. And I think you and Michelle are good guides. You bring people out there and really give them an opportunity to experience the building in its fullness.
That's a joy for me. That's my left brain, right brain, is I want to acknowledge, Van Tassel's vision. I think the story is fascinating. It reads like a science fiction novel, of course, being visited by aliens and building this thing out in the desert that looks like a spaceship and all these things. It's truly an amazing story. So we do like sort of sharing the story while we're out there, and then just feeling into while the tones are playing, and people walk around the lower chamber. They walk around upstairs where the sound is being generated. It is a unique experience, and I'm glad I live here in Southern California, where it's only 2 hours away that I can go out there and visit it. And you're there every day almost, so it feels like you're just have to be part alien yourself now to be under the influence.
Well, I'm not going to admit that on the radio.
Well, she's never admitted it completely all the way, but
our own mother has never admitted that Santa Claus doesn't exist.
What are you talking about?
I come from
Awakening Code Radio is available on podcast. Visit www.kx935.com. Click podcast, then scroll to Awakening Code's previous shows.